Greetings all, my name is Alexander von Marstall, your editor and host at MetaVisions, the official podcast of the Warden Post. Today we will be discussing quite an interesting and touchy subject, which I believe will pique the brains of a lot of people out there, especially people who are familiar with the dissident right or the real right, so to speak, on the political discourse it represented. Today with us we have one of the founding members of the alt-right movement, and the editor-in-chief and the founder of the Affirmative Right, one of the best established outlets which served as the playground of the ideas of the alt-right. Colin Liddell. Welcome, Colin. Glad to have you here.
Yes, hello, Alexander. It's nice to be on your show.
It's absolutely great to have someone who can truly give us a good insight into what happened with one of the. Now, I will not be judgmental, but I will also not be supportive. I would say that whatever it was one of the most authentic expressions of political thought, activism, and a new fresh discourse into Western politics, the alt-right movement. You were there since the beginning, Colin. How did the start of the alt-right movement look like?
Yeah, well, there were a few things going on before the alt-right started that kind of fed into it, but really it sort of all came together around about 2010 with the founding of the alternativeright.com site. And I was contacted by somebody else who was involved with the site, who put my name forward as somebody who could maybe write for the site and provide content. And at that time, I was very keen to do my bit to support dissident right ideas, identitarian ideas, various ideas and viewpoints that had been excluded from the political discourse. And so I was quite enthusiastic about lending my abilities, whatever they were, to this cause. And I was already working as a journalist in various fields, and so I was able to maintain quite a high level of productivity, and so I contributed a lot of the articles to the site, and along with Andy Nowicki, we both became the dominant writers at the site because of our industrious and prolific ability to write. And in 2012, we actually became the managing editors of the site. And that lasted for about a year and a half. And then Richard Spencer, who was the founder and official owner of the site, decided to close it down without our agreement. And so that happened around Christmas 2013. So there's a lot of things there to really unpack. But in the early days, the alt-right was very, very different from what the word means now. When people hear the term alt-right, they have a kind of knee-jerk reaction, and they see swastikas and frogs for some reason. And in those days, the early days, the alt-right was a lot different from that. It was maybe in some respects quite similar to what you're doing at the Warden Post. It was more focused on intellectualism. It was more focused on looking at the actual data behind certain social and political phenomenon, and it wasn't so much into trolling and triggering people. And ultimately, I think that was a good thing, because we saw what happened when it took the other path.
The other path being, you mean the movement being taken by the worst aspects of its membership?
Yeah. The other path is the kind of 4chan trolling, triggering liberal leftists and Jewish journalists and celebrities and politicians, and basically giving big tech the excuse to start applying the censorship. And we've seen how far that's gone. with the with the recent events surrounding the U.S. presidential election. The big tech basically comes from a leftist libertarian perspective where they believe in things like free speech. These are kind of holy grails of the old left, because back in the 1950s, the McCarthy era, for example, it was the left that was being shut down by the establishment, and so they've always had this kind of inbuilt preference for free speech, or they see free speech as an ideal that defines them. And this also grows out of their kind of hegemonic conceit and that their ideas are the best. But anyway, whatever you want to say about it, that's something that big tech had kind of inherited from its founders, who were basically left-leaning, kind of slightly hippie-ish type of people from Silicon Glen, and it went against their nature to kind of censor and clamp down. And the path that the alt-right took later on, when it started to become dominated by the kind of TRS element, the Daily Stormer element, that pushed the movement in the direction where it actually provoked a kind of counter reaction from big tech, which gave big tech the excuse to do all the extremely censorious things it's doing now. Like we've seen kind of harmless eccentrics like David Icke and all these other people kicked off the platform. We've even seen this story from the New York Post immediately shut down because it didn't fit in with this kind of leftist corporate narrative and agenda. And that really grew out of the direction that the alt-right took, probably starting about 2013, but then gaining strength in 2014 and 2015.
Do you think that one of the main issues why the movement was stigmatized in its embryonic stage was the fact that it never was a centralized and a formalized movement, but more a grassroots self-organizing organization, which enabled a lot of individuals with different backgrounds to identify with it without actually going through a process of screening or going through a process which would then decide in the end with an outcome, is that person viable for membership or not? Where do you think that the problem was with the alt-right?
Well, that's a big ask to kind of completely centralize what was initially a very small movement. I mean, one of the reasons why it was able to grow so fast was because anybody could kind of show up and join in. So I don't think it would have been feasible to impose tight kind of membership qualifications and strong top-down leadership, but I think there were other ways of doing that. I mean, if the dominant personalities, if the leaders of the movement had been more aware of the pitfalls and the reaction that would have followed from allowing certain things to happen, then probably they could have avoided a lot of the blowback. Maybe not all of it, but they could have definitely avoided a lot of it. I was very aware of this danger very early on because this is something that I think this is a cultural difference between Europe and America. In Europe, we're used to governments being a lot more kind of censorious. And this is something that you see in various kinds of hate laws and speech laws in European countries, where certain topics are not allowed to be addressed in a certain way. And so Europeans tend to be more aware of the possibility that things can go wrong from a point of view of censorship. The Americans who dominated the movement seem to be very, very naive about that. And they seem to have this almost naive belief in free speech. And their right to say whatever they wanted, no matter how offensive. And from my perspective, I thought this is not going to work out well. And one of the reasons I started to think that was because the alt-right was, from its beginning, a very kind of international movement. There were people, although it was mainly dominated by Americans, there were a lot of British involved and a lot of Europeans involved. And what that meant was, and also not just that, but the medium it was using, the internet and social media, is also very, very international. So a company like Twitter, for example, they, on the one hand, they represent Americans who have certain, statutory safeguards concerning free speech. But on the other hand, they're also, part of their audience is also based in Europe, where they're not allowed to even, talk about certain things. And so this immediately suggested that there would be a real problem. And then when a site like the Daily Stormer rose up, and this was, again, it was basically an American-based site, because Andrew Anglin and Weave are American, even though they may be living in other parts of the world. And when this site rose up, one of the things I noticed about them was that they made a point of involving themselves in European issues and European controversies. And the most obvious case of that was the way they decided to attack a British Jewish Labour MP, Luciana Berger. And I thought, why the hell would these Americans, who have very little interest or knowledge of what's going on in Britain, be attacking this rather minor Labour politician? And the conclusion I came to was that this was an act of sabotage. They knew that this would provoke a kind of reaction from this multinational corporation, Twitter, that would push them in a more censorious direction, which is what soon started to happen. People like Milo Yiannopoulos, Andrew Anglin himself, they kind of whetted the blade of censorship.
So, do you believe that there could have been a different course of action which might have prevented the eponymous censorship, which was launched systematically across different platforms? Could the movement have played it better, having a better leadership, if that was the main issue? And let's presume that was the main issue.
That's always been my case, that the leadership could have done things a lot differently. They could have really distanced themselves from somebody like Anglin, because Anglin was an obvious troll. I mean, that was, whatever you think about Anglin, his whole modus operandi is completely just to kick up as much shit as possible, and they could have really tried to put some sort of firewall between themselves and him. But instead of doing that, they did the exact opposite. They started to think, oh, this guy's cool, he's edgy, he's got a lot of energy, the young people like him. Let's try and get some of that. And people like Spencer, people like Johnson, the TRS people, they all made the exact same mistake, and they veered strongly in that direction. And once you had the whole kind of, well, not the whole movement, because the alt-right was a much more diverse and far-flung thing than that. But once you had those kind of core elements of the movement swinging in that direction, then on top of that, you had this weird upsurge of support for this insurgent presidential candidate, Donald Trump, and you had against the odds, you had the British people voting for Brexit. This really set a few alarm bells ringing, and the establishment became very worried about the alt-right, and then they basically gave a green light to all these efforts to kind of shut it down. And I was I have to say this, I was well ahead off the curve here. I kind of saw this coming down the road, and I advised people in the movement who I was well connected with, i.e. Spencer, Greg Johnson, even Mike Enoch. I advised them strongly to avoid taking this direction. This would ultimately destroy the movement, I believed. And I kind of, I didn't hold back my views telling them this. But they were all kind of caught up in the moment. There was a certain amount of euphoria. They felt that they were on top of the world. They felt that they had infinite ability or opportunity to troll people, and they didn't see how the left and the establishment would fight back.
So basically, you were one of those people who advised that a more precarious course of action was needed in order to build up the movement and to establish not only a medium infrastructure, but also an organizational infrastructure which will really enable the movement to exercise a genuine political influence on key decision makers and key stakeholders inside the system. Speaking not only in the United States of America, we're speaking about, a global network of influencers, so to speak.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. I mean, the thing is, like in Europe, you do have reasonably successful identitarian or nationalist leaning parties. I mean, they're not really running the show yet, but for example, in Italy, you have a party like Lega, which is quite strong on immigration, and if they got in, we would expect them to do quite a lot about various problems that they have in Italy. Most European countries seem to have quite well established right-leaning, nationalist-leaning parties. Even Greece, where Golden Dawn is now being shut down through lawfare, they once got to 10% of almost 10% of the vote, and even in Britain, the British National Party managed to get 2 members elected to the European Parliament. So, compared to that, America has achieved absolutely nothing in terms of identitarian movements. America is a kind of identitarian political desert. And one of the reasons for that is probably because they do allow a lot of free speech, and this makes it very, very easy for these movements to be subverted by complete nutcases or complete shills and feds. Whereas in Europe, when people are drawn to nationalist or identitarian politics, that happens within a kind of political environment where they have to be very, very careful about certain kind of hate speech laws. So there's much less freedom for the extreme nutcases and the agent provocateurs to kind of come in and discredit the movement. So this is something that's very, very obvious to Europeans, but Americans are just learning it now, I feel.
You would hear the different arguments on the European side. I have had quite a few conversations with people who are members of prominent identitarian movements across Europe. And they were saying, like, Alex, we would have been so much blessed if we lived in the USA. We have the First Amendment there. We don't have a freedom of expression like in Europe, which is really ambiguously regulated when it comes to the legal prescriptions and the laws around it. But this actually, what you're saying is quite a paradigm shift. Maybe that suppression of freedom of speech in Europe actually has helped the identitarian movement more than actually do it harm. And maybe that right to exercise freedom of speech has been used as a potential weapon against the identitarian movement in America, because the media can, easily distort the narrative, so it will look like something entirely else. Actually, to be more precise, it would look like something you wouldn't like to look like, if that makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. That's what's happening. I mean, these people you're speaking to, I'm sure they're very sincere, well-intentioned, and they would use that power probably in a positive way. But then at the same time, other people would come in, associate themselves with that movement, say things which repel normal people and discuss them, and therefore sabotage that movement. And, you know, nationalism inherently has a moral problem. And by a moral problem, what I'm referring to here is not whether something is intrinsically good or bad. What morality really is, it is avoiding making too many enemies. That's how morality functions in the world. You know, if you're a moral person, less people will fear you or hate you. Okay, now nationalism, because it has a very strong exclusionary principle, inherently it has an immoral character. So people who are not included in that group feel that nationalism is against them. Therefore, they feel motivated to fight back. And now you don't see that so much with leftism. Leftist ideas, even communism, even though you can kind of mock and laugh at their economic policies, the spirit of communism is that you know, we're there for everybody. We want to make everybody happy, and so there's not that element of immoral exclusionism, and so it doesn't provoke a strong counter reaction, whereas nationalism does. So nationalism has to be very, very careful to present itself in a way that is not seen as immoral, that is not seen as threatening or aggressive to the groups that it does not explicitly include.
What about the pan-European version of nationalism? I mean, I believe you are well familiar with the Alliance of Peace and Freedom, which is an umbrella corporation and a formal organization within the European Parliament consisting mainly of nationalistic and identitarian parties from Europe. The British National Party of Nick Griffin is an official member, for example, Liga Fiume, the Italian one. They only have 2 members of parliament within the European Parliament from Your Slovakia, I think, was the political party. But that's irrelevant. We can see the promulgation of a very interesting nationalism in Europe, Colin. This is a pan-European nationalism, which envisions a unified Europe based on the mutual culture, civilizational belonging, and the ethno-linguistic continuity of Europe, of European descended people, which will be the main reason of the existence of such an entity in the end. So we can retain our ethnic and linguistic identity as, of course, the survival as a culture. I believe that the USA already has those conditions to develop such an entity. Would you agree on it? Because this is the point where you mentioned something that Europe has achieved more in terms of identitarianism than our counterparts in the USA.
A lot of things we're seeing right now as we head into a US election is really very, very revealing. On the one hand, I've already talked about the negative role that too much free speech can cause. You know, it can lead to a lot of negatives. And the other thing in America is they have a lack of political diversity, whereas in most European countries, because it has a kind of reaction, I guess, to what happened in the 1930s. They created political systems that were kind of multifarious and multi-party, and they tended to go with politics that were proportional in their representation. So they assumed that there would always be I mean, if you look at what happened in the case of Germany in the 1930s, the Nazi Party was able to become the largest party in the Reichstag, but it was still getting less votes than I think the SPD and the Communist Party, even when it was at its height electorally. And so based on this, in Europe, in order to avoid an extremist party taking over, they were very much in favor of multi-party proportional representation democracy. And this meant that in Europe, small parties were able to make headway much more easily than anywhere else. And so if you had a small nationalist party that could score, 2 or 3%, that would be a start, and then they could build on that. Whereas in America, as we see, there's only two very narrowly aligned options, the Democrats and the Republicans, who don't really differ on that much. I mean, especially if you take Trump out of the picture. Now, you're talking about a kind of pan-European identity. And, of course, this is one of the problems with nationalism in Europe, is you have all these various nationalisms who disagree with each other about historical issues, who disagree with each other about land boundaries, for example. I believe, you're Serbian. Serbia has a lot of ongoing issues with its
we are experts on border disputes for the last, probably 200, 300 years.
Yeah, I mean,
so I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I can tell. I mean, the thing is, you've got to get yourself an island. Once you're on an island, a lot of those problems go away, and so that's one of the things that Britain has had in its favor. Although, of course, we do have some internal borders there. But yeah, it's very, very important for there to be some kind of pan-European ideal. To kind of coordinate all the different nationalisms, because another problem Europe has is that you have big countries and small countries, and so a large nationalist Germany, as we saw in the past, would tend to kind of dominate some of its neighbors. And this is something that I'm very aware of, being Scottish. Scotland is, in population terms, about 1/10 of the United Kingdom, or even less now, and we would typically be subject to kind of cultural and economic domination and political domination from England. This was very much a factor in the 1980s when Mrs. Thatcher was being elected as Prime Minister. Most Scottish people loathed Mrs. Thatcher, but every time there was an election, she, based on the votes in England, her party won a landslide. And this was the foundation, really, of the so-called Scottish Nationalist Party, and this started their rise to prominence. So there are a lot of problems that come with nationalism, and you can see why certain elements of the European Union try to de-emphasize that element of nationalism as much as possible, because it tends to cause frictions and divisions and weaknesses in the greater structure. So that is a very major problem that European identitarians have to really do a lot of work on. Have to have a lot of discussion about that. They have to hammer out some very, very clear and useful principles that can avoid a resurgence of European nationalism leading to those problems. And this is one of the reasons why nationalism is seen as immoral. It's seen as something that will mobilize two groups against each other. And in the case of European history, that has actually been demonstrated. And so, that is one of the weak points of nationalism. But also, European nationalism has another problem in the present age, because Europe is no longer purely European. Europe has become increasingly multicultural with large groups of non-European people. And European nationalism of the type that we envisage is going to implicitly exclude those people. It's very, very hard to have a British nationalism, a genuine British nationalism that embraces multiculturalism. Most British nationalists that I've known, most British nationalists throughout the ages would not find that acceptable. That would be a kind of nightmare for them. So nationalism in Europe, it has this problem between the nations, and it also has this problem within the nations because those nations have become increasingly diverse. And in both cases, that creates a sense that nationalism is immoral because you're not only discriminating against your neighboring European countries and stoking up old feuds, but you're also taken away certain rights or status from an element of the population that is already in there. And most people nowadays, or not most people, but a lot of people nowadays in a country like Germany or Sweden or England, a lot of native indigenous European people will have friends from, of various ethnic backgrounds. And so, when you're trying to appeal to those people and you're trying to say, like, we've got to do what's best for our race or our nation or our ethnicity, that's going to lead to certain problems because they'll be prone to narratives which present that as extremely immoral.
I absolutely understand what you're trying to say. Everything you spoke about greatly ties to our topic about the alt-right movement. Speaking about Europe and America, nationalism in Europe, of course, and the form of nationalism, or I would say even identitarianism present in the United States of America, were tied by a bridge. The name of that bridge was the alt-right movement, which at a certain point had a partnership with Arctos through the alt-right corporation, if you remember that period. Dr. Jason Georgiani was the editor-in-chief, I think, for a certain amount of time. The alt-right movement actually also enabled the exchange of ideas between identitarians in Europe and identitarians in America, creating this intellectual nexus for the both sides, right? Now, the real tragedy here, Colin, is why people like you, now I'm not accusing you or anyone, you must not take what I'm going to say in the wrong way. Why did people like you allow trolls and people who are intellectual midgets and attracted to the worst aspects of Nazism to take over the movement and basically destroy it?
Well, I have to say, on my part, I didn't, and I started to warn people about this tendency as far back as 2011, and I had serious disagreements with Greg Johnson very early on. I think about 2012, I wrote an article that attacked the kind of Nazi affectations of countercurrents. Obviously, in 2013, in December 2013, when Spencer closed down the original alternative right site, there was a break between me and Spencer. But I kind of thought, you've got to put your own ego on the back burner. And later, I kind of made it up with Spencer, and we kind of got friendly again. And when the alt-right corporation was set up, I was brought in as a writer at the time for the new alt-right site, and I contributed quite a lot of articles. And things were going okay, sort of. I had serious reservations about Spencer, not so much based on him shutting down the original alternative right site, because I just felt that was due to his personal weakness and maybe a sense of being exhausted and overworked and wanting to kind of declutter. And so at that time, I felt that Spencer was pushing himself in too many directions, and he was kind of overwhelmed by it, and that kind of led him to make this irrational decision to shut down the original alternative right site. So I didn't really hold that against him too much. But when he did Hailgate, then I started to have really serious misgivings about him. And, Hailgate, I'm sure most of your viewers will know exactly what that is. That was shortly after the election of Trump. There was an MPI conference, the National Policy Institute, which was the think tank with which Richard Spencer and the alt-right were associated. They held one of these conferences, and at this conference, Richard Spencer said, "Hail Trump, hail our people, hail victory."
And so there was a Roman salute afterwards, and everything exploded.
And there were some Nazi salutes, and there was a lot of Nazi symbolism going on as well. There was, a bit of Wagnerian music and some, statues of naked men and things like that.
Arno Breker, I guess, right?
Exactly. So there's a little bit of an aesthetic, more than an aesthetic nod towards Nazism at that conference. And okay, maybe it was all, terribly ironic, ha, 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 but that's not, of course, how it would be presented by a hostile media. I had serious misgivings about Spencer there, but, later on, Daniel Freiberg decided to, get together with Richard and create the alt-right corporation. Daniel Freiberg is a very level-headed person and somebody reliable and trustworthy. So based upon his involvement, I decided to become involved with the alt-right corporation. But then later on, we learned some more about Richard and, some of the things he got up to in private. Yep, there he is. And so, I just started to think that he was a kind of very, very sort of narcissistic nincompoop, really. Just was mainly interested in getting as much attention for himself as possible, and in that he was very, very successful.
Right. I guess that's the main problem with a lot of movements who are in their early stage. I think Richard Spencer fell to the trap that he wanted to emulate a new avatar, to be able to become, well, I wouldn't use the word in German, but the new leader of the movement. But on the other hand, a lot of people wanted to assume that role. So there was internal fractionism, even sectarianism, to the stage where it deeply hurt the movement in the initial phases, right? That's the first thing. A second thing is that, I think that Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, although we might not agree with his ideas, he was a master when it came to political organization, right? And the point he concluded that you cannot have too large a variation inside the leadership of a movement. And unfortunately, the alt-right had exactly that problem. You had people who are well-reasoned, well-spoken, and well-educated, like yourself, Daniel Freiberg, Jason Giorgiani, who is probably maybe one of the most fundamental political thinkers of the century, up so far, if you ask me. I don't know if you're familiar with his writing. He publishes at Arctos, etc., etc. On the other hand, well, there were the trolls. There were people who were not able to engage in a debate with arguments, but on the other hand, they would just troll and try to bring the worst kind of reactions, as you put them, from hostile media, right?
Yeah, the argument that the left always makes against nationalism is that it leads to Nazism. And if you actually, do what the alt-right did, you give them a kind of textbook demonstration of that. You had quite sensible, well-spoken people who are, intellectual, talking about serious issues that affect people, issues that really need to be addressed, which are not being addressed, issues that pertain to the survival of our ethnic or racial group and our civilization. And they always say that once you start talking about that, it inevitably leads to Hitler, to Mustache Man, to the gas chambers. And then you have the alt-right starting off as this, very sensible organization initially, completely getting away from all the old negative stereotypes, wearing suits, speaking, using intellectual words, calmly, looking good, people that anybody would be willing to listen to. And then you have all these Nazi memes and, about shoving people in gas chambers.
Not fun.
It's
not
just
fun, not serious, and you're basically not doing what you claim that you're doing.
Yeah, you're just doing the left's work for them. You're just proving them right in a way. I mean, you're not actually getting to the point where you can actually do those things, but you're just saying, look, this is yeah, you're right about us. We are straining at the leash to recreate, Auschwitz 2.0. So this is the moral problem that nationalism has. It does exclude certain people. It emphasizes a certain in-group. It focuses on the interests of that in-group, and by definition, it sort of pushes other people away or down. And so there is a lot of moral blowback built into the equation, and so you've got to. Nationalism has to be much more adept at dealing with that moral blowback that you get when you focus on what's right for your group and saving your civilization. I mean, these are completely legitimate goals. You've got to look after the best interests, the existence, the future existence of the European people and Western civilization. But at the same time, you've got to realize that does create a lot of negative blowback. And if you don't deal with that blowback, and instead of dealing with that blowback, you actually take that blowback and amplify it, then you're doing your cause a great disservice.
And do you believe that there is still a chance for a more authentic political movement to form out of the ruins of the alt-right, which will exactly avoid instead of repeat the mistakes of the alt-right?
I think there is. I mean, because what I'm saying is not complicated. What I'm saying is something that any good-intentioned person can understand. We've had the example of the alt-right. We've had the example of its failure. We've seen, how it rose up. We've seen how it went wrong, and we've seen the negative consequences of that. And those are very serious negative consequences because it takes, it sort of closes off an avenue that can lead to the redemption of Europe, and that can, lead to the salvation of the West. That's a very, very high cost to pay for making very, very basic errors. So, this is not complicated. It's not rocket science. Obviously, there is a basis for identitarianism. There is a basis for nationalism. Those justify themselves. But at the same time, they do create certain moral toxicities. And it's part of our job to realize that and to think, how can we deal with those moral toxicities so that they don't come back and poison the movement, which is what has happened in our case.
And how are we to achieve that, Colin?
Well, one thing would be to, stop the fetishization of the Third Reich.
I agree with you.
Another thing is we have to reconsider the whole Jewish question in a kind of post-alt-right world. We have to look at that in a different way. The alt-right clearly got the Jewish question completely wrong. I don't want to go into that too much here.
Me neither.
But there are a lot of things that we have to focus on. We also have to think about the problems that will be caused for other groups by the reconstitution of a Europe with its own consciousness and ideology.
You mean something resembling the European Imperium Francis Parker Yockey spoke about, the nation-state organism?
Well, the thing that Europe the problem with Europe is that we don't have an ideology. We don't have a consciousness has Europe. I mean, some of us have a European identity, but as a collective, we don't have that consciousness. It's not in our culture. It's our leaders seem to be oblivious to it. There's a lack of essence about Europe. We just think, okay, our women are having an average of 1.4 children. Never mind, we'll just bring in more people from the third world. That should fix it. There's just no consciousness of Europe at the upper levels or at the mass level. There's just a few dissidents like ourselves who notice this glaring absence of ideology in Europe. So there's definitely a lot of work to be done. And the thing is, we've destroyed the very thing we've sought to create by our own mistakes. And we don't have to. That doesn't have to be final. We can stop making those mistakes, and we can start doing things in the correct way, and then from that we can build something more positive. That's what we should be looking to do. Working out the details is going to be quite a lot of hard work, but that's the general direction.
When you spoke that Europe lacks ideology, do you refer to ideology as a creed of ideas which will enable different strains of political thought which hold the same essence, that is the preservation of the ethno-linguistic continuity of European descended people at the core of their values?
Well,
for them to orbitate around that, or do you mean ideology in terms of having a well-written and established program for political action?
Well, there's political ideology, and you have your left-wing ideology, you have your neoliberal ideology, whatever. Those are just those ideologies seem to be focused on achieving certain limited gains, like how can we have more welfare, or how can we create more economic growth. That's fine, and those are debatable, and some ideas will work in some situations and some ideas will work in other situations, and so a multipolarity of political parties is probably a good thing. But the fundamental ideology of a society or a civilization is what is missing. We don't have a sense of we are Europe, and these things are sacred, and these things should not be tampered with, and these things have to be protected. We don't have that basic core ideology of the civilization. In the past, you would have certain societies that did have that. They would believe in themselves as a people, and they would have certain sacred things or sacred beliefs. Sometimes it would be a religious thing. Sometimes it would just be a sense of their own ethnos. Sometimes it would be a kind of imperial mission that would be kind of encoded in their culture. I mean, maybe the Roman Empire would be an example of that at one stage, or the Roman Republic, and various other states. And the West, which is the most powerful civilization the world has ever seen, at the heart of it is a complete vacuum in that sense.
You mean that we have reduced our civilization on a capitalist module of economic reproduction, which elevates consumerism above everything else and treats economic growth as the only value by which we evaluate the legitimacy of every single political action?
Well, that's one of the things. The other thing is we've allowed a lot of individual freedom, and this is certainly a problem as it pertains to women. Because the main problem that Europe has is that it has a fertility rate of about 1.4. And that is very much tied up with, allowing women a certain amount of freedom in society to pursue careers and to ignore their fundamental biological duty. And of course, males too are included in this conception as well. Men have to, women don't exist on their own. How women exist, how they behave, and the birth rates they have are very, very much dependent upon how the males in the society behave and treat them. But so it's not to let men off the hook here. But there's those kind of very basic fundamental things that any person with an average intelligence can look at and see that is a serious disaster happening. We've seen how our societies have panicked over this coronavirus, which is hardly killing anybody who isn't like very, very old and with pre-existing health conditions. It's basically another relatively normal strain of flu. And our societies have panicked and they've shut down large parts of their economy. And at the same time, the fertility rate of these societies is 1.4 roughly, which means that every generation is losing, let's see, that's about 30% of its population. And coronavirus is the crisis. That just shows you how insane our society has become. And it's insane because it lacks a core ideology, a sense of what it is.
I think we have a fundamental crisis on a spiritual, cultural, and civilizational level. And it all comes up to the fact that we have severed all the ties with our past, and our past is a very clear motivational precursor for our future. We cannot aim for the stars and become multiplanetary species if we don't have an ancestral lore, so to speak, on which to base that tendency for greatness, right? Now, unfortunately, what we are seeing, Colin, is the complete revision of history, which we're seeing by, especially in Hollywood and even in British theater. You have people portraying Julius Caesar and other Shakespearean characters from Shakespeare's plays who ethnically don't correspond to who Julius Caesar was, for example, right? Or what's really interesting with Cleopatra at the moment. Rick Story has a question for you, and Richard Story is an Arctos writer who wrote an amazing book on the uniqueness of Western law, which you can find on Arctos, highly recommended. He asked Colin, does Colin think there are feds planted throughout the dissident right to drive it in bad directions? Are these just poor quality leaders or both?
Yeah, this is a question many people ask themselves, and I would say that it's not really important, this question. I mean, what I think is if you act a certain way, you may as well be a Fed. If you're acting in a way that is marginalizing and sabotaging the movement, quotation marks, then you may as well be a paid mole sent in by some sinister group to wreak havoc. I tend to think that that Spencer is too outlandish to actually be a Fed. Has a personality. I mean, I know quite a lot about him, about his personal life and his mannerisms, and it's not out of the realms of possibility that he is some weird kind of Fed, but I think he's much more just a certain kind of psychological type, and so I tend to think he's more of like a useful idiot for the Feds than a Fed himself. There are people I think are Feds, but even there, how can you really know? I mean, all you can be is a dupe or a crank, and it's probably better to be a crank than a dupe, but and therefore to be more suspicious of people than you should be. But I think what I believe in is people who behave in a way that harms the movement may as well be feds. So they're kind of like virtual feds anyway. So whether they're literal feds, whether they're on the Fed payroll, who cares? They're just as toxic.
I would like to, before we actually end the conversation, I would like to give an opportunity for our audience to ask you some questions. If you're all right with that, you can choose if the question is worth answering or not, Colin. Is that all right with you?
Okay.
So, ladies and gentlemen, you heard Colin. In case you have any questions in regards to the history of the alt-right, what was really happening inside, or about its legacy, now would be a good time to ask those questions. Okay, Rick has another one. Why was Giorgiani ousted?
I think I don't know too much about this, but I think Spencer was expecting a lot of funding from people that Giorgiani was connected to, and when that didn't materialize in the way that Spencer anticipated, that led to a break of some kind. That's my understanding, but I don't have too much inside track on that one.
Okay. Whatever happened to Matt Heimbach? I know we all know the juicy details, what happened with Matt Heimbach, but this is more a question for yourself.
Yeah. I mean, what that is the question that will baffle the gods, really. Yeah. It's not. This is not something that hasn't happened before. There's been quite a few people who have. I mean, the thing about Matt Heimbach, Trad Workers' Party, they were more like a kind of 1990s neo-Nazi throwback, really. I mean, there were some interesting people. I mean, Matt Parrott, for example, is a very intelligent and interesting and very amusing character, or he was a few years back. But essentially, Trad Worker was a kind of 1990s neo-Nazi throwback, and kind of think Jerry Springer show, bringing on the Klan members and the and then you sort of orchestrate these fights in the studio, and there's a little bit of that about Trad Worker. And those kind of 1990 neo-Nazi types, this is where the Fed posting meme really comes from. There was a lot of
the Shiners, you mean? Yeah.
There's a lot of Fed involvement with those movements, and this was a kind of typical narrative where somebody who had formerly been a well-known white nationalist decided to kind of turn over a new leaf and come out for peace, love, and inclusiveness. And so we have seen other characters do that in the past, and I guess Matt Heimbach had decided for whatever reasons to follow that path. And people have got to make a living. One of the problems with the alt-right is once you get too deeply involved in it, it sort of really can hamper your ability to put food on the table.
I have experienced that myself, so I'm well familiar what political activism and representing a certain set of ideas can do to your earning power, to your livelihood, and so on. But unfortunately, it's that your things which bring meaning into your life are not chosen by you. They tend to choose you. It's like the Roman said, Amor Fati. Or the saying, if you don't follow fate, fate will drag you forward. So, unfortunately, that's the tragedy of existence.
Yep, Matt Heimbach was dragged by fate. Yeah.
Unfortunately, and that fate was the space between the legs of a wife of a certain person close to him. So long of Orthodox Christianity. Whatever happened to Andy Novitsky? That sounds familiar, Colin.
Yes, Andy Nowicki. Yeah, Andy Nowicki. Yeah, I don't know. Andy's still there. Andy's still Andy. He's doing quite well on YouTube. He's got, he's Andy used to be one of the most prolific writers in the alt-right. And what's happened to Andy is that at some point he started doing a lot of podcasts, and then he discovered YouTube about a year or two ago. And since then, he's made like hundreds and hundreds of videos. And, he's a very kind of thoughtful person, and he addresses things with a great deal of honesty. And so some of his videos are actually extremely interesting, and all of them are, quite pleasant to listen to. So I'd recommend people check out his YouTube channel. You should probably find that by doing a simple search. He doesn't write as much for the site as he used to, but that's because he's now found another means of expression, which is doing YouTube videos.
Jack Lawrence wrote us that he's been part of the alt-right movement since 2015, and I've seen a lot through the years. I have something to say before I give you the word here, Colin. Jack, look, I really don't get it. What do people expect? You become a political dissident, you think you're going to be a rock star of the right-wing movement, and everything's going to be well and nice for you in life. No. Now, when you were joining it, I don't know what you expected, a VIP status, free membership card, that Subway, Netflix subscription for life. It doesn't work that way. So yeah, we all have been through the years, and we all have to stop victimizing ourselves and look towards the future, because even if it is an infliction of suffering, the topic here, suffering can only have a purpose if it has a meaning. And well, our aim is probably the most meaningful thing when it comes to the preservation of the most exceptional civilization which ever existed on Earth. Colin, this is one for you from Western Man. What European country gives Colin the most hope for overturning our elites?
Yeah, this is tricky, isn't it? At the moment, you'd have to say possibly Italy. Based on the performance of Liga and how well they have been doing, and the strong possibility that they might break into government at some time, and then we'd have to see how that worked out, of course. But you can never tell with Europe. One of the things I've noticed about the present situation, the so-called coronavirus pandemic that is creating all this excessive panic, I think it actually reveals a lot of latent hysteria in our societies. And so the societies which have been overreacting the most to coronavirus are the societies that have built up the most latent hysteria. And that might at some stage take a more overtly political form. So that would be something to bear in mind.
Thank you very much. As well as moving away from the fetishization. Oh my God, come on, I'm a Slav speaker, help me out here. Fetishization of Nazism, I guess. Does Colin welcome traditional Catholic and other Christian identitarian movements which have swallowed much of the alt-right?
Yeah, you have to be Big Tent about things like that. You can't say, okay, no Catholics. And then, that really cuts down the number of people you can appeal to by a massive factor. People are going to still, I'm not a Catholic, I'm not a Christian. I don't really, feel this, strong, yearning for this, what I think of as a weird fusion of classical Greek and Jewish culture. But, a lot of people are Christians or Catholic. It's a big part of their identity. It's not going to go away anytime soon. And so, yeah, I think we've got to welcome people from various cultural and ideological backgrounds. It's going to be pointless if you start, becoming too purist.
Absolutely. That's the idea behind the Warden Post. We, as a project, want to be a nexus of ideas, representing the interest and the intellectual discourse of people who think differently and who want to play and engage with these dangerous ideas, quote unquote, so to speak, Colin.
Yeah, but at the same time, you shouldn't be too naive about how these ideas can also, or these identities can also influence people. Like I'm very aware of that from a Scottish perspective, because in Scotland, people look at Scotland and they say, oh, the SNP are doing rather well. But, there is a very, very large crypto-Irish element and also crypto-Catholic element in the SNP. And that really influences how those people, perceive British politics, why they are against the Union, but very pro-EU, for example. And the more typical kind of core Presbyterian Scottish population, they tend to favour unionism a lot more and are against the EU. So these things do have ramifications, and they do influence how people think and behave, and vote and so on.
Yes, because the ideas might enable a lot of idea dissemination, which might end up destructive. And the case of the Scottish National Party is interesting because they clearly represent the tendencies for national independence for the Scottish people, but they're profound supporters of the most distortive anti-cultural policies in regards to how Scottish society should be organized. That's an amazing example, Colin. I never thought about it that way.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, the SNP they want independence, but they also want to be ruled by the EU. So there you go. And it's just an element of it's almost like a crypto-Irish element replaying the last 500 years of Anglo-Irish history, in a twisted way.
Yeah, Western men just approved what we were saying. What does Colin think of the future of Celtic nationalism now that SNP and Sinn Féin are in league with the system's worst aspects? Well, we answered that a few seconds ago.
Yeah, I don't think much of it. Yeah, I think they should definitely take a step back.
The last question is from Dave Martell. Hi, Dave. Dave has an amazing podcast running, The Bog, and he's quite a figure among adherents to the Asatru faith of old. We had a debate how we can transcend the differences on the right between Christian traditionalists and adherents to the old gods. So hi, Dave. Thank you very much for watching this. And he says, my biggest criticism of the old right was it had no actual economic solutions for the working class as it was led by bourgeois sodomites. What type of actual economic solutions would a future movement champion? This is for you, Colin.
Yeah, well, I think we're moving into a very, very different economic world than the one that existed before anyway. So there's going to have to be a lot of rethinking of economics generally. With the coronavirus and people losing their jobs and the government having to support people in certain countries, we're going to see a strong case for this universal basic income. And so there's going to be a lot of unanswered economic questions that will have to be looked at in a completely new way. The alt-right didn't focus too much on economics. It did actually have some, economic dimension. Arctos put out a book of essays by alt-righters called A Fair Hearing, the alt-right in the words of its members and leaders. My essay in that book focused quite a lot on economics. And I was making the case that the West was basically exporting debt, and it was importing unemployment, and it was finding ways to kind of store that unemployment in its society through various forms of dysfunction. So, I think there is actually an economic alt-right, or there was, because the alt-right is now dead, in my opinion. But there is a corpus of economic ideas if you dig around and look for them.
Most certainly. Good that you mentioned Arctos, actually. For anyone who needs any food for thought material, arctos.com, guys, this is probably it's the only publishing house which really publishes original ideas. One of the last titles they published is Beginning with Heidegger by Michael Millerman. I still personally haven't read the book, but I most certainly will do so because I'm negotiating a book review together with Michael Millerman, the author. They also published a Handbook for Traditional Living 2, an essential read if you read the first one. The second one also comes from Raido, which is an Italian, I think it's a think tank. I'm not familiar with it, Colin. Maybe you know something more about it. Then, of course, Prometheism is quite fresh. Jason Giorgiani, probably, as I already said, it's not an overstatement. The guy might be the most authentic political thinker of the century so far. So guys, if you need any read materials, go and hit Arctos. You will most certainly find things you would like and genuinely enjoy. In the meantime, I want to say thank you very much for calling. It has been an immense privilege and pleasure to have you in the studio. Do you have any other words before we conclude our conversation?
Well, since you give me a chance, I'd like to, recommend my book, Interviews and Obituaries.
Where can we find the book?
It's sold on Amazon. It's a self-published book on Amazon.
Is it under your real name?
Oh yes, yeah.
I have to be honest with you. I pretty much like the graphics of the book. Can you tell us a thing or two about the book? So here it is on Amazon.
Yeah. It's basically a number of interviews that I've done over the years with a variety of people, mixed together with several obituaries of well-known or interesting people. So it's quite a fun read. It's interesting. There's lots of famous.
Have you done an interview with Osama bin Laden?
No, that's one of the obituaries, actually.
All right. Well, I don't. It's not claimed, but yeah, interesting.
Yep.
So, guys, if you really want to check out some interesting interviews and obituaries, definitely feel free to check the book. As Colin said, you can find it on Amazon. I think it is on the UK branch of Amazon too.
I believe so, yeah. I mean, I think it's just on Amazon anywhere.
Right. So check that. And is the affirmative right still active?
Oh yeah. The affirmative right is still pumping out an enormous amount of content on a monthly basis. So, and of course, we've got most of the old alternative rights articles going back to 2010. So you can scroll down. You can access according to year.
Here, the blog archive, you mean?
Yes, the blog archive. So you can pick a year, you can pick a month, and you can have a look around there, see what we were writing 10 years ago or more.
Interesting. 2016, 17, 2018, and 19 have been the most prolific years for the affirmative right as a blog.
Yeah, I guess so. But of course, there's also lots of articles which are not there at the moment, or which have been taken down for various reasons.
Definitely interesting. So, guys, if you allow me, I would be posting. I can post some of the thought-provoking and interesting articles across our different social media. That would be great. I think cooperation is definitely a good thing in order to disseminate interesting and authentic political ideas. So, guys, you can check out Colin's book and, of course, The Affirmative Right. I had a chance to read some of Basil Benton's articles, which you actually published, and I was pretty much happy from what I read among his articles and some other articles on the affirmative right. So it is a cool place to do your reading. So Colin, as I said, thank you very much for your time today. And I think that I tend to think that good times are coming with less censorship and less deplatforming for us all, in order for us to exercise one of the more primordial democratic and citizen rights, and that's the freedom of speech.
Exactly, yeah. By attacking us, they're also attacking a lot of other people as well. So they're going to have a lot of toxic blowback.
Well, you know that poem by Martin Niemöller, who was a Lutheran priest in Nazi Germany. He wrote a poem, and I'm paraphrasing. When they came for the Social Democrats, I said nothing. When they came for the communists, I said nothing because I was not a communist.
Yeah.
When they came for the Jews, I said nothing because I was not a Jew. And when they came for me, there was no one to speak out. History repeats itself.
Yeah, we're all in the same boat now.
Definitely. So thank you very much, guys. Check The Affirmative Right and check Colin's book. And I leave you all in a good mood for the rest of the weekend. Colin, all the best for you. Hope to have another conversation, to have a chat with you soon.
Okay, cheers. Right, thanks a lot, Alexander.
No worries. Bye. Thank you. Bye-bye.